Hi, and welcome to our review of Chapter 4, a Communication Theory Sampler. We're just going to do a quick overview of some different communication theories. To start out with, communication is sometimes defined as a complex process that is pervasive, amoral, and allows us to advance our life agenda. To break that down a little bit, pervasive means that communication takes place even when it's not deliberate. Some examples might be if you start nodding off during a speech, you are kind of accidentally telling the speaker that they're boring. There are different ways that you can communicate when you're not meaning to. Amoral means that the communication process is ethically neutral. It is not good or bad. Communication also advances your life agenda. We use whatever communication skills we can to influence others to think, feel, or act in a certain way. Of course, it's not good to do this in a manipulative way, but most people do this persuasively. And remember, it is amoral, so it's not good or bad. It's just something that we naturally do to advance our life agenda. Another theory, Aristotle, he's got his persuasive appeals that we use a lot in persuasive speeches. Those are logos, pathos, and ethos, or logos, pathos, and ethos. Logos is logical appeals. This basically says, listen to my message because it makes sense. For example, if you're organized, you present evidence, you cite sources, you've got facts, you have presented yourself logically, and you've used logos. For pathos, these are emotional appeals, and these basically say, listen to my message because of the feelings that my message evokes. For example, you could provide personal stories or emotional, detailed stories, whether they are hypothetical or real, and that will get your audience to feel something, which persuades them using pathos. Or there is ethos, the audience's perception of the speaker's credibility. This says, listen to my message because I am a competent and trustworthy person. An example here could be citing your sources, or it could also just be the way you speak confidently, and also the way you're dressed. It establishes your speaker credibility. Moving down a little bit more, we've got the Semker factors. Different people pronounce that acronym differently, but it's basically part of the communication model. So you've got source, message, channel, receiver, and environment. Down here, we've got the definition and variables. The source is the person initiating the communication, and there are some variables there like personality, attitude, gender, and education. For you guys, when you give your speeches, you as the speaker will be the source. Message, the message the speaker intends to send, there are some variables there like strength, organization, humor, and appeals used. So of course your message would be the content of your speech that you have crafted. For the channel, this is the means through which your message is sent. It can be sight, sound, email, text, live. For the receiver, this is the audience to whom the message is delivered. So there's age, culture, and gender, which are some variables that affect it. For the environment, this is the situation or context in which the transaction takes place. And of course, it can be noisy, crowded, or number of other different variables. So how can we control the above variables? Some are harder to control than others. I put down here, for instance, in publishing a book to send a message, you can control the message variable, but it's very hard to control the receiver variable because you can't force anyone to read your message or buy your book. Most people think that we have the most control over source variables, which would be us, the speaker, and that is not true. We actually have the most control over message variables because we can craft our speech a certain way with certain organization and certain words. We have the very least control over the receiver variables, like I mentioned above. We can't control if the receivers actually listen to our message. The elaboration likelihood model, also known as the ELM, this was created, discovered by Petty and Cacioppo, and they describe it as a comprehensive theory of persuasion. Elaboration is the degree to which a receiver scrutinizes a message. The central route, this is when receivers mentally elaborate on the elements of your message and carefully scrutinize your arguments and evidence. The peripheral route is when receivers give brief attention to the message without elaborated thought. For instance, you might get up to give a speech, be dressed very professionally, stand up very confidently, and immediately the audience says, I believe them. They are going to present a great speech, and maybe they don't listen to the facts throughout the speech, and they just notice they are so professional, they're dressed nice, they had a nice smile, I like them. And that is why this person is now persuaded by their speech. The central route is when you kind of look past some of those factors and you actually carefully think about the arguments and the evidence and whether the speaker was actually credible. The route by which the speakers process the information depends on how motivated they are. The factor that's strongest in determining the route is relevance, or how relevant the speech is to them. So going back up here, the route by which speakers process the information depends on how motivated they are. For instance, if they are hungry, they might say, I don't have time to really pay attention to this, I'm doing the peripheral route. If maybe the information is going to be on an exam or they have to write an essay about it later on, they might use the central route. So it depends on how motivated they are. What speakers need to know about listening. So this is what you guys need to know as public speakers and communicators. Number 1, be sure to have a strong message that's relevant to your audience. Number 2, define any unfamiliar terms and use standard English rather than using jargon and slang expressions. And also, don't curse. Number 3, offer opportunities for clarification. During your speech, you can do this a few times, but remember in my class, you only have 5 to 7 minutes for a speech. So you can ask the class for a raise of hands if you want to clarify something, but it really needs to be quick. In the real world, you can build in opportunities for questions and feedback during the middle of your speech or after your speech, after you've received a round of applause. So you can do this, probably not the best idea during your actual speech in my class, but again, if you were giving a 1 minute or a 1 hour keynote speech or something, you could build in that question and answer session later. Number 4, assume that your audience may not have the same listening style as you. For instance, there are people-oriented listeners, action-oriented, content-oriented, and time-oriented. And just to clarify that a little bit, if you have a friend who is in a rush and they say, okay, you better make it quick, I've got 30 seconds, that's time-oriented. They might not say that out loud, but maybe that's what they're thinking, and that's the type of listener they are. Or action-oriented. Some people say, okay, let's get to the facts and I can help you with a solution, and that's more action-oriented. And number 5, use confident language in your speech. Don't say things like, I suppose that, or I guess, or maybe. Use confident language so that your audience trusts you and knows that you know what you're talking about. That's it for Chapter 4. In the next chapter, Chapter 5, we will talk about analyzing your audience. I will see you guys later.